Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Hello, and welcome to episode 95 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. Before we start our discussion of the final episode of Season 1 of Loki, it's time for this month's shout-out of my patrons. One small correction to my patron list. I've been thanking John Breen, but he reminded me recently that while his name is on Patreon, that this is actually coming from daughter Lily Breen, who doesn't have an online presence yet. Thank you for your support, Lily. In addition to Denise Bennick, Jesse Clark, Ricky Garvin, Rob Garrison, Forrest Woodward, Aaron Borst, Carla Hoffman, Lyndon Onstead, Julio Herrera, Matthew Saint, and Utuk Zul, who all help keep this show running, and it's truly appreciated. Remember, it's just $1 per month to join them, getting you this monthly shoutout and exclusive content like scripts of the shows and audio outtakes. Now, let's get right into it, where even the opening of the show is different from what we've seen or heard before. And we get started with the Marvel Studios logo, but we don't have the Marvel fanfare.
No, the choice they made this round was very interesting.
Yeah, we get lines from all over the Marvel universe, from all over the MCU. And underneath those various lines, did you recognize the music bed?
See, I was familiar with this music bed before it was featured.
Okay.
I was already familiar with the song. So when I heard it, I'm like, oh, yeah, the song is It's Been a Long Time. It's a World War II song. And it is the song that's at the end of Endgame when Steve Rogers goes back to be with Peggy Carter.
Yep. It is their dance that they finally get. And then kind of continuing into that, we get a pan out of the world, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, and we get more lines in there, some of which are from the MCU and some are from real people.
Yeah, some of it is just life and news. I mean, it's very similar to the opening of Contact.
Yes. Yeah, I had that thought as well.
Yeah. So Contact was specifically illustrating how far out radio waves go.
Yeah, Contact was doing it to illustrate a point that became important in the movie, whereas this is just kind of a montage of life on Earth.
I feel like the goal here is to set up, here is our universe, and here are the things that have happened in it.
Okay.
Because once we do this pull back, we get to this one singularity, which I suppose represents the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are two. And when we get to two, we start hearing some new voices.
Yeah.
Which at that point, there are voices that have happened after Endgame.
I think I know you're right, because at least one of them was Vision saying, "What is grief if not love persevering?"
Exactly.
And another one was Sylvie saying, "Open your eyes." So right before they went into this portal to what I'm going to call the Citadel at the end of time.
I believe that is an accurate summation. I noted it as Citadel after a while. Yeah, it is beyond the void at the end of time.
And the other interesting thing was when we go to the title credits, the Loki with the shifting letters, that theme music was different too.
It was slowed down and it was in a more minor key because it continues as Sylvie and Loki approach the Citadel. And it's the same theme that we've been hearing all throughout the show, but they've slowed it down. They've changed it to sound more eerie, which is using more minor notes and keys and other
Right.
musical things I'm not that familiar with. To make it sound spooky and sad.
Yeah. I just thought it was interesting that they just continue that music through the opening titles rather than doing the usual thing of doing the regular opening titles music and then switching back again to
That's how you know it's the season finale, man.
well, I used to listen to, when it was an ongoing thing, the West Wing Weekly, which was a podcast all about the TV show West Wing. And one of the things they would comment on occasionally was when the cold open went into the opening credits, and how sometimes it flowed really well, and other times it was just so incongruous. How you'd have this really serious dum dum dum, and then it's just da na.
Yeah, I think they were a little smoother this round.
Yes, they actually put the right music to the opening credits rather than just using the usual. And then we get to them at the door to the Citadel, and Sylvie looks ready to kick it in for a second. Then she's not quite ready yet.
The hard part with coming to the end of the journey is if the journey has defined you so much, now what? And she's starting to feel that, now what? These are the answers I have been looking for, but do I really want them?
And if I get them, what do I do with them?
Exactly. And Loki is not pushing.
No.
Yeah. Specifically, he has no thoughts on the issue. He's just going to follow her lead and see what happens.
And I really enjoy his acceptance at this point. He's like, I know that no matter what I say, you're going to do what you're going to do. So I'm just here to support you.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like he recognizes that this is the climax to her story, not his.
True. But before they can kick open the door opens all on its own.
Of course it does.
I was feeling very Scooby-Doo-ish.
Oh, yeah.
Here, where they walk in and they're looking around and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, the design that they chose for the Citadel is interesting because it reads as marble with all these gold streaks in them that look like fractures.
Right.
I mean, it looks like the place is cracking even though it's completely solid. One could say the design is heavy-handed. I don't think so. I think it's symbolic. But
there's a difference between there's a difference between symbolic and knock you over the head with the symbolism.
Yeah. And when they walk into that main atrium, we have these gigantic statues that read fairly feminine, not super feminine, but fairly feminine, that have faces that are clocks, possibly without hands.
And speaking of faces made of clocks, we get a nice jump scare as Miss Minutes shows up, who we now find out has been working for the head of the TVA all along.
I love it when you have a character that seems so flippant that suddenly becomes maybe not the big bad, but big bad adjacent.
Right.
Who really knows more. And we got a little hint of that last episode as she was making up void spaceships and taking too long to get through files.
Yeah, but at that point, it seemed like she was just still helping out Ravonna.
Exactly.
But now we find that she is working for He Who Remains.
Yep.
Now, we talked a little bit about He Who Remains back when we first talked about the TVA and the Timekeepers.
You will have to refresh my memory.
So in the comics, He Who Remains was somebody who worked at the TVA. He was the last TVA agent to survive. And he was basically near the end of time and decided to create new beings who could watch over time and continue the TVA's work. And his first attempt at doing this created the Time Twisters, who were the evil, selfish version of these creatures. But in a later story, he kind of got a second chance and redid it and created the Time Keepers. And so, as I said in the first episode, the causality of He Who Remains in the TVA is reversed. It's not the TVA was created and He Who Remains was the last one. He Who Remains made the TVA in this version. And we'll get to who He Who Remains is in a moment. That's a very difficult sentence to say.
It is.
Because first we have to deal with Miss Minutes and her offer to the Lokis on He Who Remains' behalf.
Yep.
She basically offers to give them everything they want.
Yep. Offers Loki the option to win, to rule, offers Sylvie nothing but happy memories, and offers that both Sylvie and Loki can be together.
Yeah, they can exist together on the timeline.
Yes. They can be in the same place at the same time, which is a problem if you're a variant of each other.
Right.
But of course, to that is no deal.
Nope, it's all fiction.
It is all fiction. And I mean, even to me, it smells like a time loop.
Yeah.
If they had said yes, then Miss Minutes would have delivered. But what she would have delivered was a time loop to store Sylvie and Loki in.
A happy time loop.
Yes.
But still a
time loop.
Because it seems like what is being offered is impossible.
Yeah.
So they turn that down, and then we get a new scene with Miss Minutes back at the TVA, where we get some interesting setup here and don't get a lot of...
Answers are not something that it was heavy on.
We get a lot of answers, but we also get a lot of setup for another season. And so Miss Minutes comes and says, hey, I brought the files you need. And Ravona's like, these aren't the files I asked for. I love Miss Minutes' expression here. Earlier, she says, well, I had something to take care of. And her eyes go really...
slitty?
Well, not quite slitty, but it's like her eyebrows are kind of
drawn
squeezing
down.
In. Yeah. And up until this episode... Miss Minutes has always been perky and helpful. And now you can see that she is as devious as the rest of them. And she says, well, no, he thought that these would be more interesting.
And Ravona does not know who he is.
Yeah, Ravona does not know about He Who Remains. But I think in season 2, she will find out.
Oh, yeah.
Because, as I've pointed out, Ravona has a history with this character in the comics. But we get that very brief scene there, and we go back to the Citadel, and we get another one of those Dutch angle rotating shots.
It's really slow, though. It wasn't the same as the sweep from the last episode.
No.
That wasn't fast, but it also didn't meander. This one took its time to spin through the Citadel, and then it ends up in the room with 3 statues and one that is wrecked.
Right. And unfortunately, even watching this on my new big screen TV, I couldn't tell details of what these statues were. I kind of assumed that they were, since it is 3 of them, that they were either the Time Keepers or the Time Twisters.
My assumption as well. Some version of that.
Yeah. But they are in the, I called it the Rotunda.
Yeah, good name.
And the door suddenly opens and the Lokis are ready with their swords.
Oh, yeah.
And it looks like all of Miss Minutes' happy-go-luckiness went to this guy.
It's Atticus. I mean, no, it's not Atticus. If you watch Lovecraft Country, this is Jonathan Majors, who played Atticus in Lovecraft Country. And quite frankly, if you haven't watched Lovecraft Country, you should. It's really good.
It is a really good show. But for those of us who keep up with all of the casting news for the MCU, Jonathan Majors has already been announced as Kang. And so, well, first of all, called it. I did say that Kang was going to be, and it's not exactly Kang,
No,
but it is a variant of him.
Yeah, this is not Kang the Conqueror.
No, although he does make that reference.
Yes.
He says later, some have called me a ruler, a conqueror, but he never gives out his actual name in this.
Nope. Yeah, this is Kang the slightly unhinged.
Well, it's kind of a mixture of a few characters.
Okay.
Because obviously there's the name of He Who Remains. And then we know that it's a version of Kang from the casting news. You know, that's not something that you would know just from watching the show. But there's also, I believe I mentioned when we first talked about Kang, is that there are a few different versions of that character throughout time. And one of them is Immortus. And Immortus was the one who was a future version of Kang who had basically aged out of his conquering phase and was more interested in keeping the timeline safe. He's still pretty manipulative, so I wouldn't classify him as a hero per se.
Right.
But he is usually more on the side of doing the right thing than trying to conquer. And so I kind of think of this character as a version of Immortus, and even refers to himself as immortal, which is obviously a form of the word.
Right.
So there's all those kind of bits and pieces all mashed together to make this character that is unique to the MCU, but has a lot of influences from the comics.
Well, and this is what we see as the MCU going to the Marvel vaults, and they're not cherry picking, they're streamlining.
Right.
You know, they're taking all of this history and all of this stuff and trying to figure out how they can make both intricate and coherent storylines for the MCU.
There's a lot of history there in the comics that they have to streamline. If they tried to explain Kang versus Ramatut versus Immortus,
your typical movie going audience would be sitting here just drooling with their heads back going,
Yeah. But one thing I do want to point out again is that another variant of Kang is Iron Lad, who is one of the people who put the Young Avengers together.
Right.
So it looks like we're headed towards that as well. So now that we've gone over that kind of history of of who He Who Remains is, we head to his office via elevator.
And Sylvie takes a swing at him in the elevator and he flashes away.
Yeah, he knows exactly when he has to teleport to avoid her sword.
It was the most tense elevator ride I'd seen in a while.
Since maybe Winter Soldier?
Could be, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, apparently they got a thing for elevators.
Before we start, does anyone want to get off? And they get up to his office, but before we get any more details, really, we get another cut back to the TVA.
Actually, I do want to mention something on the design of the office. I really liked it. But it is like a grand professor's office. It is the kind of office that every professor in elite college wants, or even non-elite college who wishes they were in an elite college, but that's what they want because it's all the space with their fireplace, their books, and a desk with an insane amount of carving. There are the chalkboards that roll up and down in the back. One of them has something all over it. I have no idea what. I'm kind of curious.
No, I couldn't.
And the windows are just beautiful because they're supposed to call to stained glass. but the staining of it is not in the glass. It's the universe rolling behind it that creates the color and the light effects. But the edging around the panes is so intricate to bring that to mind, which is interesting since in episode 1, we did start out in a church.
Right. Also, just a real quick note here. The window is also a hidden Mickey.
Oh my God, was it?
It was one big circular window
Yep.
with two smaller circular windows at just the right angle. The mouse controls all.
The mouse sees all. The mouse creates all.
At the end of the time, there is only Mickey.
Would not surprise me if that was true.
Love you, Disney.
All right, back to our cutback.
Yes, cutting back to the TVA, and Ravonna is...
She's coming apart at the edges.
Yeah, and Mobius shows up.
He's looking frayed around the edges too. But we all know why.
Yeah, we've seen why. The fact that he was able to survive the void and get back to the TVA is unprecedented. And Ravonna calls for help, and Mobius is like, nope. That's not gonna go the way you think it is. Nope. Because it turns out before he entered her office, he and B-15 showed the other hunters who Ravonna originally was.
Yep. Welcome to FDR High School in Fremont, Ohio, 2018.
And I was so close on this one. I said the FDR pen represented Mobius's past.
Nope, it was Ravonna's.
It was Ravonna's past. But I did say that that person was going to end up being a principal there.
Yep. Get that right.
And so we meet Rebecca Tourmanet.
Yes.
Which you only get by reading her diploma in the background. But that is an alias that Ravonna Renslayer has used in the comics.
Excellent.
When she was hiding from Kang. So again, they love making these little references that aren't vital but are enjoyable for those of us who know these sorts of things.
Well, and it keeps the fanboy ire down too. Because if they had just made up a different name to put onto the diploma,
right,
there would have been, hey, Dr. Wright, why you put that there?
That's wrong. Well, except Rebecca Tourmanet was an alias and one of many aliases. So it's not like it was her real name or anything like that.
Right.
Now, granted, I'm not the kind of fan who gets angry when there's not the exact right reference that I want to see.
Kurt's a good fan.
But it would have been perfectly acceptable to me to have her name be basically anything.
Right.
But the fact that somebody went and found a name that connects to Ravonna, that is one that a 2018 person could be named, is a nice level of detail and shows the kind of commitment and passion that the people at Marvel Studios put into the projects. So after we get that revelation of who Ravonna originally was,
explains why she's a judge at this point.
Yeah.
And why she's very good at her job. I mean, it's a similar skill set. In fact, I called her a teacher at the beginning of on the first episode.
Yeah, she's got that teacher principal. She's got that school administrator vibe throughout the entire series. And now we know why.
I am the authority here, you punk. Knock it off.
And so after we find out all about Ravonna, we go back to the Citadel again. And we find out that He Who Remains arranged all of this.
With the wonderful line of, you are a flea on the back of a dragon. That's good.
Yes.
Good. And he shows how he knows everything by, once again, handing them the script, essentially. This one on Dittos.
Yep.
So
Yep.
once again, we're dealing with outdated technology.
Well, of course. Although Ditto's definitely caught on,
Well, yeah,
unlike some of the other technology we saw at the TVA.
correct.
Dittos were a very common piece of technology for quite some time. So he who remains knows everything that's going to happen.
Yep.
And Loki at first doesn't believe it. He says, no, this is all a manipulation.
Right.
And we get that great back and forth between Loki and He Who Remains of, oh, that's where your mind goes to.
Uh-huh.
That's interesting. And he is just able to cut through both of them to their core.
Yep.
First with that, and then with Sylvie asking her, can you trust anyone at all?
Yeah, the immediate cutting into that when you know that is his attack for the rest of this, is sowing the doubt with Sylvie and with questioning Loki's motivations.
Right.
And he insists that the journey must be completed.
Well, yeah, I completely agree with him on this. Even if you know how it's going to end,
Yep.
you have to experience the journey to fully make the transformation into what he hopes will be the next leaders of the TVA. But speaking of the TVA, we cut back to them once again.
So here's the part where I started finding this episode, I have to admit, a little on the tedious side.
Okay.
Because we start getting the greater good argument. And it's a solid argument. It is one that does not have an answer. It is a philosophical debate, and it will be till humanity is gone.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they go through it about 14 times in this episode. But this is the TVA's version, Ravona's version of it's the greater good. Who betrayed who?
Well, the thing I noted in this conversation was that Ravona has to believe that it was all for a reason.
Yep.
She can't accept the fact that she may have been duped, that she may have been on the wrong side. And so she refuses to accept that this was all a manipulation, to use the phrase from earlier.
Right.
And at this point, she decides that if the TVA isn't going to exist anymore, then she's on her own and she's going to go out and search for her own free will.
Yep. Opens a door, steps through it, and that's it. We're done with her for the moment.
Well, except there's that brief bit where Mobius tries to stop her and gets his ass kicked.
Yes.
She's like, this isn't, even with you holding the weapon, this isn't going to go well for you.
Nope.
And he's like, well, let's give it a try. And she just, boom, oh, there I am down on the floor again. Yep, turns out you're right. This wasn't going to go well for me. And instead of repruning him, she leaves him to his own devices and steps through the portal.
Well, I mean, at this point, what's the point of repruning him?
True. So yeah, Ravona exits the show for the rest of this season, at least.
All 20 minutes of it?
Yeah. And we continue our cutting back and forth and come back to the Citadel,
where the greater good argument continues.
Yes, but there's one thing I really wanted to make note of in the history lesson that He Who Remains gives. He explains that even though the TVA wasn't what people thought it was, even though the Time Creepers weren't real, the TVA's mission was real. And then he goes into this history lesson. Now, at this point, I'm going to refer to him as Kang.
Okay.
And you'll see why in a second. Because he shows us how multiple Kangs on multiple worlds discovered the multiverse. And when it started, they originally worked together to improve each other's worlds. Well, there are multiple Kangs. In addition to the ones with other names, the other incarnations of them, shall we say, like Immortus and Ramatut and Iron Lad, there are also just Kangs from alternate universes. And because of their time traveling abilities, they've gotten together and formed the Council of Kangs. And so you will have meetings where it's a
Bunch of the
100
same
Kangs
guy.
in the same room, all working together to make sure that they collectively end up on top in their respective universes. But not all of the Kangs that are approached will agree to join the council.
Right.
And so there have been Kang versus Kang fights. And that's what Kang, or He Who Remains, describes as happening. Some of the versions were not as, I don't remember the exact phrase,
Yeah, I
but
don't remember
were
the
not
exact
as pure of
altruistic.
heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not as altruistic, we're not as pure of heart as the first few Kangs were.
Well, the first few Kangs that found each other were scientists.
Right.
You know, they were explorers. They were who, not always, but generally, your scientists are a little more altruistic than, say, your conquerors.
It's true.
Your guys who are like, how can I take this over? How can I use this to my advantage?
Yeah, but eventually he found some Kangs, obviously, that were more evil and started the multiversal war between the realities, which we saw the description of from the Miss Minutes exposition dump way back in episode 1. So you get to see that a lot of the story of the TVA was real.
Oh, yeah. Well, and he even alludes that, because he uses the word dogma, that in order to settle the Time War, a dogma is created, which creates this whole kind of religious vibe that the TVA often has in its philosophy.
And he also explains here that now he says the first variant discovered Eliath.
Right.
And then he says that he experimented on Eliath and weaponized him to end the war.
Right.
Which makes me wonder, is he the first variant?
Yep.
Because he's not definitive about that, but it seems heavily implied at the very least.
Right.
That he was the first variant to discover the multiverse. And he was the one that also ended the war. It reminds me a lot of Doctor Who, with the War Doctor ending the war by destroying everyone who was fighting.
Yeah. And this is also reminds me of Rick and Morty, where you have a citadel of Ricks, where all the alternate Ricks have gathered. They've explored it, and I have not watched all of Rick and Morty. I'm behind a few seasons, but they have explored it, you know, that some Ricks are more equal than others.
Right.
So this one also kind of has the vibe of some Kangs are more equal than others.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And, you know, he gives them the warning, if you think I'm evil, just wait until you meet my variants.
Yep. The gambit is the devil you know versus the devil you don't know.
Yep.
And he specifically uses the term devil several times.
And if you know anything about Kang, you understand exactly how evil he can be.
Right.
So coming at this from somebody who knows who the character is, it seems like an easy choice to me. I'd be like, all right, where's my office?
Yeah, so you're choosing the stifling order over the cataclysmic chaos.
Knowing who's behind the cataclysmic chaos, I would definitely choose the order that is currently in place.
As He Who Remains is going through the history, which I did notice bore a slight resemblance to the history that they used at the beginning of Black Panther, where you had the substance that was shaping and moving.
Right.
The Black Panther was more like sand. And this is clay or metal, depending on how you read the light, or it's metal behaving like clay. But it still kind of had that same vibe. So it gives you something to watch while we're giving you all this exposition, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a more entertaining way than just having the character talk.
Yeah. Well, and you're able to read some of the consequences and some of the emotions behind it without somebody saying, well, I was mad and stuff blew up.
Right.
You have the characters say it did not end well, and then there's something that looks like it didn't end well. There's a mushroom cloud and some people crying. You get to show instead of tell, which is what is good entertainment, they say.
Yes.
But as Kang goes through all this history, Sylvie is sitting there getting madder, and Loki is getting more resigned.
And this is where he really tells them, I want you to take over for me. And Loki at first is like, wait, why would you give up control?
Yeah, he was absolutely confused about the idea of giving up power. Why would you do that?
And Kang, or I think Immortus is probably a more suiting name for him at this point.
Yes.
He's tired and old.
Yeah. It's the same issue classic Loki had. He's old.
Yeah.
He's tired. He has now seen it all. And with Immortus, he knows how this plays out.
To a certain extent, because it's right about this point that we get the distant thunder rumbling, according to the captions. And we reach the end of his knowledge.
Right.
He says, I have to be honest with you. I did know it all up until about 10 seconds ago.
Yep. Now it's all over. Right before he gets to that, part of his pitch to Sylvie and to Loki is he says to them that we've all done bad things. Now you can do them for a good reason.
Right.
Which I think is one of the reasons that his choice of the persons or people to take over the TVA is the essentially the villains. So the idea of villains being in charge, you have a certain moral flexibility there that you don't have in a pure hero, generally speaking.
Right.
So that means that those villains can handle the idea of the ends justifying the means. Pain and plotting that they tend to cause by being villains now becomes a global tool instead of just being self-serving. So instead of, I want to rule because I am awesome and want to rule, is now because, no, I rule and I tell you what to do because I know how to make this world better, but you're not going to like my choices.
Yeah. If you tried putting somebody like Captain America in charge, he would break down.
Yeah.
He would never be able to make the kind of choices and cause the kind of actions that are necessary to keep, something as huge and as vast as all of time in order. So moving on from there, he gives his big pitch.
Yep. Time to decide.
And Sylvie is not buying it for a second and just immediately goes to kill he who remains.
Yep.
And Loki stops her and is like, wait, let's just stop and think about this for a minute.
Yep.
Which is completely reasonable when you're talking about the massive universe-sized stakes.
Well, and here's where we run into the biggest difference. Well, maybe not the biggest, but one of the big differences between Sylvie and Loki in their philosophies. Sylvie is in pain. The reason she's doing what she's doing is because she was ripped from her home by the TVA and has spent God knows how long running up and down the timeline trying to get revenge for that life that she lost. What she has as normalcy is this vague memory of a happy childhood. And everything after that is disaster. And she has a very specific point and a very specific cause for why things went bad. So now she's got the opportunity to take her revenge on the guy who's at the very top of things going bad. And she cannot think past that pain. There's too much trauma. There's too much pain. Loki, on the other hand, he's up for it. His goal was ruling, and he is being offered an opportunity to rule with a much better moral foundation.
And with someone he cares about.
Correct.
He would get to do this side by side with Sylvie, but unfortunately, Sylvie refuses to trust. It is just like He Who Remains called it out near the beginning of this conversation.
Yep.
Sylvie can't trust anyone. And Loki says it as well.
Yep. You can't trust, and I
can't
can't
be
be
trusted.
trusted.
And so a fight breaks out.
Yep.
And I've said throughout this series how great the fight choreography is,
Uh-huh.
and it continues here.
Well, the elevation of the fight from just using their swords, their physicality, and starting to use their magic. And the magic increases as they continue to fight. The stakes get higher. They're willing to take bigger swings at each other.
Yeah. But Sylvie looks like she's on top and is about to go kill Kang. And Loki teleports in and basically is like,
yep,
sword to his neck, says, stop.
Mm-hmm.
And the line here really touched me when he said, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want a throne. I just want you to be okay.
Yep. So that's about 3 movies worth of growth he did in 6 episodes.
Yeah. And us shippers finally get the moment we've been waiting for.
It's about damn time.
As Loki and Sylvie kiss, but Sylvie says, but I'm not you.
Yep.
And uses the tempad that she took off of He Who Remains' desk.
Which he offered.
Yeah, he put it out there and left it there for the easy taking.
Mm-hmm.
But she took it and created a portal and pushed Loki in and kills He Who Remains. And with a see you soon, which is probably one of the creepiest last words ever spoken, we see Sylvie break down as she, like you said, she finally got to her endpoint and now doesn't know what's next.
Yeah. I mean, I think she'd make a great Dread Pirate Roberts, but...
And we get to see in space behind them, the timelines just start fractaling out. Yeah,
big time. I mean, it's not just the nice, neat branches that you have on the TVA monitor. It's just lightning strikes.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, it's very fractal in nature, where every split, you see more splits come off of that split, and it's an infinitely repeating pattern. And so, yeah, we see these new infinite amount of timelines being created. And we cut back to the TVA where Mobius and B-15 are seeing a very simplified version of this playing out on their monitor.
And we get Loki landing in the TVA and taking a run through it. And I kind of felt like part of the point of this is to give us one more look at the TVA before the season ends.
Yeah.
Because we got going through the library, we got going through the halls, we got going past a bunch of Minutemen. Yeah.
Well, before he does that run, there's that moment where he's just sitting there taking it all in, and then he finally pulls himself together and takes off. And Tom Hiddleston says so much with no words.
He's a damn fine actor.
He really is.
Yeah.
But he runs through the various areas of the TVA and finds Mobius in the records area. And we get our big cliffhanger.
We get 2 little cliffhangers on this one, I think.
Well, yeah. The first one is he goes up to Mobius and explains everything that happened. And Mobius basically responds, okay, who are you? So this is a completely new timeline. And this is a new Mobius who never worked with Loki or was even aware of Loki's existence.
Nope.
Up to this point. And Loki looks around and sees very much a Kang statue. He is wearing Kang's costume. He Who Remains, the outfit he's wearing has a little bit of Kang, a little bit of Immortus. It's kind of a mixture. Immortus is usually mostly in greens. Kang is in purple and green. But Kang is wearing armor,
Right.
is wearing a skin-tight outfit. So the outfit he's wearing in the Citadel is much closer to Immortus's outfit, but the statue we see is Kang.
Right.
And that's where we end the show.
And a great many of us, at least me, went, oh, what? What? Because they flipped through the entirety of the photographed credits.
Yeah, you get the standard closing credits, and before they get to just the regular end titles, then you finally get the stamp.
Loki will return in season 2.
This is the first Disney Plus MCU show that is getting a second season.
Nice.
Well, it's not the first one to have a second season announced, because What If,
right,
when it was first announced, was they basically said, this is going to be a season by season show, and we have at least the first 2 seasons planned out, because animation takes a lot longer to make than a live action show. So you have to commit ahead of time if you want to get shows coming out in a yearly fashion.
Right.
But this is definitely the first one that is live action and is getting a second season. But before we get to season 2, we've got so much stuff that is likely to tie into this.
Yeah.
This has made Loki the show. If you are going to watch one Disney Plus Marvel show, this is the one you have to watch to know and best understand what is coming up and what is happening in the future movies.
Because Kang is already attached as a villain of Ant-Man 3, and and we also have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness coming out.
Yes. Yeah. And Spider-Man No Way Home, which we know has Alfred Molina and Jamie Foxx returning as Dr. Octopus and Electro, respectively.
Wait, wasn't Jamie Foxx's Electro in the Andrew Garfield ones?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I remember Molina's Doc Ock because he was really good.
Oh, he was great. I think Spider-Man 2, up until the MCU, I think Spider-Man 2 was the best superhero movie we've had.
Beating the original Superman.
I think so.
Oh.
Now, don't get me wrong. I love the original Superman, but there are enough moments in it that feel dated at this point. And while I love Christopher Reeve's performance as Superman, I could leave or take Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. I think his Lex Luthor is overly broad.
Yeah, it's a very broad Lex Luthor.
And I think the best Lex Luthor we've had live action was in Smallville.
Michael Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Okay. Damn, I'm good.
And the best Lex Luthor period that we've had was in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited.
And wasn't that Clancy Brown?
That was Clancy Brown. Very good.
I'm really good at this game.
So we know that these characters are coming back in the next Spider-Man movie. We know that Doctor Strange is dealing with the multiverse. We know Ant-Man and Wasp is going to have Kang as the villain. And I found today an interview with Jonathan Majors from a couple of weeks ago saying, Kang in Loki? I have no idea what you're talking about. He's not showing up. So he's a very good liar himself.
Yeah.
And
he's an actor. I mean, that's kind of part of the job.
Part of the job. And so at this point, Kang can show up anywhere. Yeah. I would be very surprised if he shows up in Eternals, except maybe in a post-credits scene. But I think he is the big bad of Phase 4.
Yeah.
And so it is completely possible for him to show up anywhere and anytime.
It's an interesting casting choice then, because their last big bag, Thanos, was Josh Brolin, who, I mean, Josh Brolin's been working since forever, like 1985 or 7 was Goonies. Goonies was 87.
I think Goonies was 85.
Maybe it was 85. But ever since Goonies, we have known who Josh Brolin is.
Right.
You know, so he is very established and very well respected as an actor. Jonathan Majors is a new player, essentially. You know, he's been around, but he hasn't been noticed until Lovecraft Country.
Right.
And now he's all over the MCU. So, I mean, nice job, guys. Good catch.
Yeah. And I loved his performance in this episode. I didn't mention it before this, but I have to say his combination of nonchalance with deadly seriousness. I don't know. It's something about his performance. I wanted to keep going with He Who Remains for as long as we could.
Well, and Immortus was a certain, or the Jonathan Majors Immortus, just what I've decided to go with here, just to identify people better, was insane, but it was not an annoying insane.
Right.
It was a good insane. It had levels. It had variance in language choice and patter. You know, because sometimes it was very poetic and flowery, and sometimes it was yelling at Sylvie to grow up.
Right.
You know, it was, it was a good madness. And sometimes he giggled like a madman, and sometimes he stared blankly, and all of it had a whole lot of, you're right, it was an excellent performance.
Yeah, it was captivating, I think, is probably the best description I could give. You just sat there and wanted to watch it and just keep watching it. Yep. So that, I think, wraps up our discussion of Loki.
Oh, we have but one more thing.
Oh, of course we do.
Final, and I have to go back a bit. We've been sharing too many Loki memes on this chat. The final, there she is. Patty Cake's swoon scale. All right, hem. Patty was not a fan this round. 5 out of 10 for this week's episode. It was really anticlimactic, and maybe I don't understand the comics enough to appreciate Kang's monologue. I just found it boring. I love the fight scene between Loki and Sylvie, and Tom's performance was exemplary, not surprising. The emotionally charged words during the chaotic scene were so fantastic, and she's pissed about the kissing. She felt forced and like fan service. You know, truth be told, I'm a fan and I felt serviced, and I'm okay with that. I feel like it also made sense.
I felt it. Yeah, I felt it belonged in that moment.
Yeah, I feel like a point was lost on Patty's jealousy.
I understand.
Yeah, there's some girl kissing her man.
You know, there was some guy kissing my Sylvie.
So there you go. It's just one of those things you got to accept every once in a while. Yeah, falling in love with movie stars, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Or with characters.
You can make your free pass list, but they're probably never going to find out about it. With Patty getting the final word, we wrap up the discussion of Loki Season 1. I would like to take another moment to thank Anne for joining me on the show for the last 6 weeks. I think she's been a valuable addition to the conversation, and I hope you agree. I'm taking a much-needed week off, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with another listener question. And it's not too late for you to get your question put at the top of the list and get it answered next episode. Just email me at welcometogeektown@gmail.com with any topics you're interested in hearing more about. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to ask more anonymously. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. If you'd like to support the show directly, you can do so at patreon.com/welcometogeektown, where for just $1 per month, you get access to scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them,
Welcome to Geektown, population us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Lovitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted materials of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.